Okay, hello guys. How are you today? Or tonight, rather. It's nighttime for me. Today I want to make a video on someone named Mindshift who has a YouTube video. He made a YouTube channel and he has quite a bit of subscribers, about 118K subscribers. So um, he's someone who critiques Christianity and the Bible and things like that. And so I want to make a video responding to his video on heaven and the 7 reasons why heaven fails and the problems with paradise. I'm a little late to the party. This video he made is like 2 years old, but I just made my YouTube channel, so I'm gonna try to do more reaction videos and give commentary on videos of people who are critiquing scripture or critiquing Christianity or something like that. I'm going to do more videos like that, just experimenting to see how it goes. And so I hope you like this video. So let's get right into it. He has a little intro here. I'm going to skip this intro. It's a it's a little long, and the video he made is a little all over the place, kind of. But we're just going to skip the intro and get right into the first problem here. So fast forward it there.
As kids, when
I'll respond to it once he gets through. He has 7 problems. Once he gets through the problem, then I'll respond to the problem, and then we'll go on to the second one.
we heard about heaven. Now, some of our parents told us, oh, it's great, you'll be riding flying horses and eating whatever food you like the best and all of these things. But that's not the reality. Many of us were told about the worship part, that we would endlessly, eternally be worshiping God. Now, maybe some of that are correlating worship incorrectly, and we thought of the praise and worship parts of service at church, and we thought, oh, I don't want to do that forever. Maybe worshiping God is just living perfectly. Maybe that brings glory to him. But the actual descriptions we get of worship are closer to the first one. They are about songs that are sang, instruments that are played, our bodily position of being bent over and bowed down, etc. That does not sound fun. But Brandon, you don't understand. We'll be filled with the light. We'll be filled with God's presence. We'll be right there. We'll be compelled to do nothing else. There will be no greater thing you could do for eternity than praise God. I'm going to skip the narcissistic parts of how ridiculous it is that this God who wants a relationship with us is having an end goal where the vast amount of all time, like if eternity is real, if infinity is a concept and you live 120 years, take it to the max here, it doesn't matter. It's like nothing. It's literally more comparable to zero than any other number. That means that God's intention, his design for all time, is just to have his robotic slaves worshiping him. Why would he need this? Why would he want this? I'm serious. Like, if you really zoom out, it makes no sense, and it sounds absolutely awful. Talking more on the monotony front, I really believe that something that never ends, right? That we're going to run into a series of repeatable events forever. I really think a lot of people
To be fair, he's the one kind of making it sound awful, because he's talking about it as if, this is like what the Bible teaches heaven is, and it's not. But I digress.
who haven't thought about deep time or haven't read mathematical books on the concept of infinity and things like this, which is a huge interest of mine. I absolutely fascinates me. They have a hard time conceptualizing, and I do too. I'm not like, oh, I read a few books, now I get it. Like, it's an impossible thing to conceptualize, but there are some visualizations and some kind of thought experiments that one can do to help get them further down the road. And the further down the road you go towards the concept of infinity, the more you realize there's no good version of it. There can't be. Nothing can go on forever and be a good thing. You'll live every possible occurrence of anything that can be done in heaven, a billion, trillion, quadrillion, Google times a billion times over forever, and it will be just the beginning, just the blink of an eye of how many more times you'll do it again. But that's just a little teaser to get us started. I've already realized that I've mixed kind of points 1 and 2 here, which is monotony and slavery. So let's just kind of combine this, point 1 and 2, and I'll continue to talk about it. Now, a lot of the excuses for this are, again, going back to, but you don't understand, we've never been in the very presence of God. We could spend an eternity worshiping him, and it would be amazing. Well, this then leads to that second point that we've already mixed in a little bit, which is slavery. Heaven sounds like eternal submission.
He passed,
now, a lot of trillion could...
My bad. He passed the first problem. Okay, so let's address the first problem he made. The first problem he made, he talked about boredom or eternal monotony. So when it comes to heaven, uh, how do we, and this is a problem that, a lot of people fear, they think of heaven, think of like, oh, this is going to be boring. There's no, like, what are we going to do? Just worship all day and all this other stuff. First of all, I just want to bring up the point that it is, first of all, when you look in scripture, when people think of this idea of falling on your face and worshiping God all day and all this other stuff, that's not really biblical. When you look at the biblical figures and you look at how they worship God, they didn't really do that a whole lot. Okay, that's really sort of like a man-made tradition. It's just how like church does it. It's not really, you don't actually see God's people in the Old or New Testament worshiping God that way, like on their face, bow down all day. They fall on their face. When they do, it's usually because like an angel appears before them and they're so terrified that they lose strength in their legs. Other than that, that's not how it happens. Like he said, yeah, that's kind of what how the Bible kind of teaches. And well, no, it's not. That's how you were taught it by Christians when you were a Christian. That's not actually how the Bible teaches it. And so, no, we're not going to be bow down on our faces, worshiping Him for eternity all day, singing holy, holy, holy is the Lord. No, if we do that, we're going to be free to do that when we want to do that. And that's something very, very important, that we as human beings were not actually made to worship God in that sense. And worship is really just being grateful to God. It's having gratitude, because in heaven we're going to be rewarded. And when we get rewarded for the things we do, we're going to thank God for rewarding us. And that's going to be something that's constant. So we're going to thank Him, and you can understand that as being worship, being grateful to God. But this idea that we're just going to be on our face all day, bowing down, and I don't think any Christian understands heaven that way. There might be some, but I think I heard John MacArthur describe it that way before. So to be fair, there are Christians who probably think that's what heaven's going to be like, but that's not what Scripture says it's going to be like. I can't think of any text that shows that heaven's going to be that way. God did not create us to worship Him in that sense. Worship would just be gratitude and gratefulness for the rewards that He blesses us with in heaven. That's what worship is. It's thanks. As a way to kind of remember Him and things like that. The reason why God demanded worship in Scripture in the way that He did was to combat the demons in the way that, because the demons demanded worship from humans too, and so God was almost like competing with demons for worship, so that human beings would not fall into worshiping them. And that's why He demanded the kind of worship He did. Originally, though, that's not necessarily how human beings were meant to worship God, originally. But in any case, no, worship's not going to be that way. That's not what Scripture shows. And then the other thing he said in terms of monotony, he talked about events repeating themselves. Now, I talked about this in a video that I made, a previous video that I made. I think it's called "The Biblical Themes Will Repeat Themselves." Go check it out in my videos, and I might put in the link if I figure out how to do it. It's easy. I think I know how to do it. I'll figure it out. But I'm still learning this YouTube thing. But yeah, the idea that events will repeat themselves. It comes from the idea called eternal reoccurrence, and that's kind of it's it's both a philosophical idea and it's kind of a religious idea as well. It's the idea that events will repeat themselves because time is infinite. And if time is infinite, then the events that happen in time is infinite. Because time is infinite, so events are infinite in time. In other words, they continuously occur. They don't stop happening because time doesn't end. It's basically the idea. And you can understand eternal reoccurrence in, there's not just one way to understand it. You can understand it in this way where events are identical to each other. They repeat themselves in an identical manner. Or you can understand it in a way where it's just the themes that are repeating, but the events are actually different, right? So like, I believe like, and again, I made a video on this, that the biblical themes will repeat themselves throughout an eternity. So the theme of creation, fall, judgment, redemption, consummation, the millennial kingdom, all these things are going to repeat themselves in cycles throughout human history. And that's a kind of eternal reoccurrence. But it's just the themes that will repeat themselves. How it actually plays out, though, will be different. And so events will repeat themselves more in a similar way to one another, not in an identical way. And that's a difference there, because that means events will differ to some degree. It's just more of the themes, the overarching universal themes that are intrinsic to time that God put there will kind of repeat themselves, but not the actual event itself. And that's how we avoid the kind of monotony of infinity. That's one way. And then the other thing the other reason why we're not going to get bored is because in heaven we'll be able to actualize anything we want. So anything you want or desire or think about, you'll be able to actualize it. You'll be able to actualize your thoughts. So it's not going to be like it is here on earth, where there are things we want and we can't actualize, we can't fulfill those desires and therefore achieve some kind of fulfillment. But on this earth, what gives us excitement is like dopamine. We get a dopamine hit, and that produces kind of this adrenaline or excitement, and that's what alleviates boredom a lot of times. In heaven, we're not going to have dopamine receptors. What's going to excite us is God is going to give us the ability to actualize any desire or world we want, or any desire we want. And that the future anticipation of that world that we actualize will excite us, right? So we'll be able to have anything we want, and so that desire will be able to fulfill our desires, and God is going to constantly be rewarding us with new wisdom and knowledge to be able to actualize new things, so in new worlds, in a way. So we'll be able to avoid that monotony. So it's not going to be a problem. Okay. He has this very kind of archaic idea of heaven, this idea, this kind of medieval kind of idea where it's like, it's just just on our knees all day, quote in Isaiah 6 and all this other stuff, and that's not what it's gonna be like. So yeah. So moving on from that.
Brilliant. Google times problem. 1 billion times over for points 1.1 and 2. We've never been in the would be amazing. Well, this then leads to this, again, going back to, but you don't understand, we've never been in monotony and slavery. So let's just kind of combine this, point 1 and 2, and I'll continue to talk about it. Now, a lot of the excuses for this are, again, going back to, but you don't understand, we've never been in the very presence of God. we could spend an eternity worshiping him and it would be amazing. Well, this then leads to that second point that we've already mixed in a little bit, which is slavery. Heaven sounds like eternal submission, right? Can I choose to leave? That would be question number one. Can I opt out? Can I choose oblivion at some point? Maybe after 2 billion years, I'm just really done with this concept. Can I leave? No, I can't leave. Well, Brandon, it's not so much that you can't leave, it's that God wouldn't have you have the desire to leave. So God's controlling me. God's controlling my mind. God's controlling my will and my desires. He's forcing it. He's compelling it by his very presence. That's slavery. I don't care what positive spin you want to put on it because you've called God a good thing. I'll even, for all of this that we're talking about today, I'm going to entertain the idea that this God is actually somehow good, just, and moral, which is already so problematic, right? But I'm trying to really just think like, okay, you guys are all right. This God.
It depends on how you define good, just, and moral. So, I mean, if you define it the way you do, well, yeah, it's not consistent with your idea of good, just, and moral, but
is real. Hell doesn't exist. There's oblivion and annihilation and universalism and all of these things. How is heaven going? And the very fact that I have no say in the matter, I have no say that that's the only alternative, right? Like with universalism, or that it's the, sure, maybe it is better than hell. I'll give you that. But the lesser of two evils doesn't make it beneficial or good. And God forcing it to be good, right? Like if I can't even choose to think how I want to feel about it, to have my own experience, if every single person who's ever lived, think about how different we all are. If we're all going to have exactly perfect, repeatable, and expected outcomes in heaven, to experience everything in the exact same way, what's the point? How on earth could we all agree on that without some coercion, some forced manipulation of our will and thought processes and feelings? Oh, we don't have will, thought processes, and feelings, so we are robots. We do have will, thought processes, and feelings. How? Show me how. How can I utilize them in heaven? If I can't think of alternate perspectives, if I can't come up with a better outcome, if there's just nothing different, if it can't end, like, do you guys understand really what this would seem like? And so many of you have justified the version of heaven as being so good because it's so much better than the alternative. But I'd encourage you to really think about, if hell didn't exist at all and someone just told you at the end of your life, here's what happens. You go, you get a new body, you don't feel pain anymore, you don't feel sorrow anymore. You're perfect. You're a perfect being. You can't grow. You can't get better at things. You can't develop a new skill or hobby. You can't improve. And your entire existence is simply to shout over and over, holy, holy is the name. Is that something you would willingly sign up for? No. And don't just say yes because you're still afraid of death or you're still afraid of hell and you're not sure what happens in the afterlife, so at least this one doesn't have any pain in it, right? Like, are you just choosing it because it is, again, the lesser of two evils? Or up in your feelings and your emotions and the glory and presence of God that you can't have those faculties, then you are no longer you anyways. You are indeed a slave robot. You can't have it both ways. You're somehow an individual in heaven. You still get to pursue your passions and hobbies. How? First of all, the Bible doesn't even tell us that we can do that. Second of all, if we can't be sad, then we can't ever have messed up, right? Like if I want to get really good at wood carving and I mess up, what does that look like in heaven? What does a mistake look like in heaven? How can one learn? How can someone improve? Again, like the concepts here, the philosophical ideology of what heaven's issues are endless. And let's just say I'm wrong about so many of these facets that I don't think I can be wrong about, and we do get to grow in heaven and we do actually excel, and there are layers to this. Well, that's going to lead to some unfairness problems, which I'm going to cover here in a few points. But before that, still, to what end? We're talking about eternity. I can only do so many hobbies. Like, do you understand everything that you can ever imagine is finite? We have a finite amount of things we can be interested in or do. We have a finite amount of times we can do them before we lose interest. We have a finite amount of growth that we can do in any particular subject. This simply doesn't work. Eternity is never going to be a good thing, no matter how you spin it. I don't want to live forever. I honestly... Okay, so we'll talk about the second problem here. Again, this video is kind of all over the place. He kind of like jumps from topic to topic a little bit. But the basic second problem he brought up was, can we choose to leave? The answer to that question is yes. Okay, and I made a video on this as well. You know, these are my first videos on heaven and the Garden of Eden and, you know, and things like that. And, you know, I talked a little bit about that in my first videos. Go back and watch those videos if you want to know more about it.
But yes, we can act. We will actually be able to choose to leave heaven, because God will not can like one of the things that people don't understand about heaven is that, first of all, the Garden of Eden was the first heaven. The first heaven is a place, was the dwelling place of human beings. And it was heaven. When people ask the question, why didn't God make us in heaven? He did. It was the garden. It was the first heaven. The third heaven is God's abode. It's his throne. The second heaven is where the angels dwell. And then the first heaven is where human beings dwell. Okay, and then earth was the dwelling place of the animals. A lot of Christians think earth is the dwelling place of humans. No, it's not. Okay? Earth is the dwelling place of the animals, and it's from the garden, the cosmic mountain, the Garden of Eden, that human beings ruled over the animals. Okay, from this ascended place. The first heaven is the atmosphere. It's the sky, which was the garden. Okay, that's where Adam was in the garden. Okay, he was in the first heaven. So, and he sinned and fell from it. Okay, he chose the knowledge of good and evil. So, when we return to the first heaven, we will be able to fall from it and choose the knowledge of good and evil like Adam did. So we will be able to leave it if we want. But even without sinning, we'll still be able to leave it, because another thing people don't understand is that God's not going to confine us to heaven. He's not going to trap us in heaven. We'll be able to travel to and from earth, maybe travel to other planets, travel to the third heaven, to God's abode. We'll be able to go anywhere we want to. We're not going to be confined to this particular location. Okay, so even without sinning, we'll be able to leave heaven. It's just if we leave it by sinning, we won't be able to freely go, travel back there, because we'll be banished like Adam was. But we'll have the freedom to, visit other dimensions, if you will, and other places in the universe, because the whole universe is going to be our playground. The heavens and the earth will be our playground. We'll have freedom to go anywhere we want. And so this idea is, and again, I don't blame him, because this is what he was taught when he was a Christian. And this is what a lot of Christians think heaven is going to be like. But no, God's not going to confine you to this one location. You'll be free to leave it, either by sinning and be banished from it and choosing the knowledge of good and evil like Adam did, or just by freely visiting other places if you want. So that would be the answer to the second problem. So moving on.
Do not believe there is any good version of heaven. If it's a choice and I get to talk to some creator at the end of all of this, I don't care who the creator is or what his issue. This is probably honest, but let's move on. This leads us to point 3, which is the free will issue. This is probably honestly one of the top 2 issues with heaven. Okay, so once again, we can't cry, we can't suffer, we can't feel pain, we can't die, etc. All of these things, again, straight from Revelation. So, are we good in heaven? Yeah, we're the epitome of good. We're as moral gets. Okay, so I can't suffer, and I am good. I'm good all the time. Everything I do and say is good, because it has to be, because otherwise it might bring suffering to me or to other people. It could bring sadness. It could bring sin. There's no sin in heaven. If there's no sin in heaven, then there's 100% only good moral things according to God. That right there 100% means there's no free will in heaven, because that is the entire defense for why we must have free will on earth. Now, I'm not the first to make this point, but maybe you haven't heard it, or maybe you've excused it, and I'm going to really ask you to consider this point if you claim to be a believer. Why does God let bad things happen? Well, you don't understand. It's not really God doing it or letting it happen here on earth, Brandon. He had to allow free will. We have to understand pain to understand pleasure. We have to be able to reject him so that he doesn't force us. God wouldn't want us just to be robots, okay? And that's the excuse for all of the atrocities on this earth. And if you really are too historically ignorant or too in your bubble to understand the realities of the horror of this world and of the history of this world, to think that that is somehow a justifiable excuse, I feel sorry for you. An all-powerful God could and should do better. But that's not what this is about. This is about heaven. So there is a concept of us being able to be perfectly moral and still experiencing joy and worshiping God and having connection with him, having communion with him, and all of the things that God wants from us without sinning, without suffering. And it's actually the plan for the majority of our existence ever when you consider eternity. So why have these 100 years of suffering, pain, and death for everyone? It makes no sense. You cannot have your cake and eat it too on this one. To be very clear, if there is sin in heaven, it's not heaven. It's not perfect. If there can't be sin in heaven, that means something is controlled, either our desire or our will, our ability. A lot of people will say, Brandon, again, you don't understand. In the presence of God, you won't want to sin. That is such a cop-out. Then why doesn't God share his presence with us here on earth? Well, because it would rob you of your free will. So his presence does rob us of free will. This is just beyond simple to me. Earth is 100% unnecessary because we are always going to end up in heaven with a God that is controlling us, where he does not allow for the bad things and yet still somehow provides the pleasurable things. So if it is a good thing that can exist without all of the bad things, make this make sense to me. This is honestly one of my biggest problems, not just with the concept of heaven, but with all of the belief system in God in general, mainly because it ties to my connection with the problem of evil or the problem of suffering, and the indefensible excuse of free will completely falls on its face when you consider the realities and the setup of heaven according to the Bible. We could talk about this topic for 3 hours, for 10 hours, for 2 weeks. Like, this is endless to me. This is of so much interest. There are so many little caveats and so many things to iron out, but I think I've given you the general idea of it, and feel free to argue any remaining points you have, because I've looked into them. I'm very interested in this, and I have found it absolutely inexcusable. Point 4, and I'm worried I might end up
Okay, so hitting on the third problem, which is the problem of free will. Now, he goes into the free will theodicy here. So the free will theodicy argument is basically the argument that a lot of Christians make, a lot of Christian apologists make, that the reason why there's evil in the world is because of free will. God gave us free will because if we didn't have free will, we would be robots, and if we're robots, we can't truly love, and so he had to give us free will. And the counter argument that skeptics make sometimes, particularly atheists, when they're arguing, is heaven. It's kind of clever where they say, if free will is the reason why we sin here on earth, and we're going to have free will in heaven, then therefore how come we're not going to sin in heaven? If we can have free will in heaven and not sin, why can't we have free will on earth and not sin? Is basically the idea. And it's a good argument, to be honest with you. But, and I have a problem with free will theodicy in general. I don't think the reason why we sin is because we have free will. I don't think free will necessitates sin. It just means we could sin. It doesn't necessarily mean we will, although we do, or whatever. It just depends on, it really depends if you agree with free will theodicy in a lot of ways, or what your view is on that. But here's what I would say to his argument here. Will we have free will in heaven? The answer is yes. Okay. Will we be able to sin in heaven? There will be things we will be able to do that will be forbidden. Um, there will be many things we won't be able to do, but there will be some things we will. So we'll be able to choose the knowledge of good and evil. Um, we'll be able to, you know, uh, since we're gonna have reproductive parts, we'll be able to ideally like commit things like bestiality and all this other stuff because we have reproductive organs. Um, yeah, we'll be able to uh, we'll have the freedom to sin, and I think people will. I think the fall will repeat itself. It's gonna happen again. Um, it's not going to. I don't agree with this idea that um, there'll be no more crying and suffering and things like that. Um, I know Revelation says that, but I think that's talking about for the church. I don't think we're the church. That's a whole nother discussion that I talked about in previous videos. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that the fall will happen again because we will have free will. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone who's in heaven will sin or fall. It just means some people will. Because I don't think free will necessitates evil. Um, but let me just grant that we can't sin in heaven. Let's just grant the argument, okay? Let's just grant that we can't sin or what have you. Does that mean we don't have free will just because we can't sin? No. Okay? You can have the freedom to choose between different goods and still have libertarian freedom. The ability to do evil, first of all, it depends on how you're defining evil, but the ability to do evil does not, or the inability to do evil is, or the ability to do evil, I'm sorry, is not inherent within the concept of free will. As if you don't have the ability to do evil, that means you don't have free will. Free will, libertarian free will, is just the ability to choose otherwise. It's just the ability to choose other than what you did. It doesn't, it's not necessary to have the ability to do evil in order to have free will. Okay? I'm not sure any philosopher defines libertarian free will that way. That's just another form of it. Like, there are different degrees of libertarian free will. Some people can have greater libertarian free will than others. There are weak forms of libertarian free will. There are strong forms of libertarian free will in philosophy. The libertarian free will is not, he's putting free will in a box and he's saying, okay, this is how you define free will. And what's inherent in this definition is the freedom to do evil, and if you can't do evil, therefore you don't have free will. Like, what? Like, that is not you. Free will is just the ability to choose otherwise. That's all it is. It's just the ability to choose to do something other than what you chose to do. Okay, that's it. It has nothing to do with the freedom to do evil. It has nothing to do with the freedom to sin or whatever. None of it means you don't have free will. Just because you can't sin, it doesn't mean you don't have free will. That is a non sequitur. That is not inherent in the idea of free will. Okay? So I don't know why he thinks this. He's just putting free will in a box and he's just defining it in this one particular way. That there's no nuance to free will, there's no complexity to it, or something like that. And it's like, that's just totally wrong. Okay, you look at philosophy and the philosophy, in any philosophy paper on free will or the textbooks, there's obviously different forms of libertarian free will. Okay. There isn't just one form. There's conditional ability, then there's libertarian free will, there's weak forms of it, there's strong forms of it. There's all kinds of nuance when it comes to free will. So I don't understand why he has this kind of narrow understanding of it, that if you can't do evil, you don't have free will. Where does any scholar define free will that way? I'd love to know, because I just don't think people now Christians do kind of seem to think that we need the free will to sin and truly have free will. And so maybe I can understand why he might understand free will that way, but that's not true. Okay, it's just conceptually, it's just not true. Free will is far more nuanced than that. You don't need to be able to do evil or sin in order to have free will. Okay, it's just the ability to choose otherwise. That's it. Okay, so let's move on.
Redundant here, but I'm going to try to hit on the idea of perfection and of stagnation. So despite the point that we just went through, I really actually understand to a degree the concept that one cannot appreciate the good things in life without some understanding of the bad things in life. The problem is...
he's talking about stagnation and not growing in heaven and things like that.
There's so much bad and suffering in this world that the good does not outweigh it, and I don't think it's as easy as a one-to-one compensation or even a heaven-to-earth compensation, right? Should 4 children have to starve to death in the next few minutes for me to appreciate the next meal that I'm going to get? Is that the idea? Is that the trade-off that has to happen? How many young women need to be raped for other women to appreciate being in a good relationship? Right? These are just inexcusable and immoral ideas to me, that we had to have this level of suffering. God did control this. God did set up the arrangement. He is at some point holding the puppet strings, and he has made certain barriers within when he will intervene, when he won't, what the initial setup is, how capable we are as individuals of doing things to other individuals, etc. Like, there are limits that he has put on our earthly existence. And within those limits, he is still allowed for this amount of suffering versus this amount of pleasure. It does not add up. It is horrible all on its own without adding in the heaven factor. But there are some things. Let's go back to my example of taking up a hobby. What makes a hobby enjoyable? Well, we actually have a lot of research on this from a neuroscience standpoint, where we understand that really it's the process of achieving a goal that is so desirable, that is so enjoyable. It's not reaching that, right? I'm someone who for a number of years was very heavy into endurance sports, and it is always fun to cross the finish line on your first ultra marathon. That was a big goal I had, and I've done a lot of them now, and I've done longer distances, and each time it's exciting and there's a huge sense of accomplishment, but it's immediately over. And what I realized I was enjoying the whole time was the achievement of getting better, right? Setting a new PR in training, upping my weekly mileage, learning how to deal with that injury better, going for that run when it was really cold and snowy or really rainy or 105 degrees and humid, seeing myself grow in self-discipline, seeing myself push through and become more mentally tough and stable. These were the true treasures, but they were only treasures because there were days when I quit. I didn't go on the run in the rain because I couldn't run as fast, because I couldn't make it all the way up that hill without stopping. Those are the pains that make the pleasures worth it. So again, I understand that to a certain extent. I don't understand it to the extent that we're excusing all the horrors of this world. But in heaven, to get back to my point here, there can't be any of that. So yes, on one hand, inexcusable with the free will concept and being robots in heaven, but on the other hand, we should need small amounts of things not working out or going wrong to be able to enjoy anything. I just imagine heaven being a place of pure stagnation. Think about how gross water becomes when it sits versus when it flows in the river. You've probably heard the old adage, if you're not growing, you're dying, kind of a thing. What is it like to be the exact same level of anything forever? It terrifies me. That sounds like true torture. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, heaven is so bad that hell all of a sudden seems better. No, hell is the worst of all worst possible things, but heaven is still awful. What does it mean to be perfect in a perfect state with a perfect body forever? It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. For Christians that are so hung up on meaning, right? Where do we get our meaning in life? The only answer you can muster is God, and then you get him forever. And then what does it mean? What does it mean? It means nothing. I'm blown away that there are not more people constantly deconverting.
Okay, so this fourth problem is the problem of stagnation, not growing in heaven. Okay, now most Christians believe, and most scholars believe, that we will actually be growing in heaven. And he asked the question, well, how, if you're going to be perfect? First of all, I actually do think there's going to be conflict in heaven. Because without conflict, we can't I guess, be like God, right? We can't reflect his glory if there isn't conflict. So I do think there's going to be conflict. In fact, in the scriptures, when you look in Genesis, when God tells Adam to till the garden, he uses the word, let me look it up here. He uses the word guard, a word that means guard, when he gives responsibility to Adam and Eve. Man had put him in the garden to tend and keep it. So that word tend there can be translated as guard. To guard the garden. Okay, so what is the point of him guarding the garden what is he guarding it from? There's not going to be any kind of adversity or conflict. I think God intended for there to be some kind of adversity and conflict in heaven. Or in creation. I don't think there isn't going to be conflict, number one. I think there will be adversity. I think the animals that God created act as adversaries in a way against humanity. They try to usurp humanity. The serpent was an animal, it was a beast, and it sought to usurp Adam out of jealousy because we were called to rule over the animals, and the beast was envious of that and sought to usurp Adam and manipulate them and deceive them. The animals do act as a kind of adversary to human beings that human beings are called to subjugate and subdue. And so there will be kind of conflict there. But in terms of perfection, the idea that we won't be able to grow because we'll be perfect. Again, this is him taking the idea of perfection, the concept of perfection, putting it in a box. And he doesn't understand there's nuance to it. Okay? He's a smart guy. Mindshift is a smart guy. I'm sure he knows that there are different concepts of perfection, that there isn't just this kind of one narrow understanding of perfection. There's qualitative perfection, there's quantitative perfection, there's absolute perfection, there's relative perfection. If you kind of apply a relative perfection to humanity, which would just be the idea that relatively speaking we would be perfect, meaning relative to I don't know, like an animal or something, I don't know, or like to the way we are now, for instance, will be perfect, right? Or you can understand it as this idea where when we think about what we'll be capable of doing and what we will know, it's not that we will know everything and be able to do everything, but everything we will know and will be able to do, we will be able to do it and know it perfectly. And that when it comes to the things we don't know and we're not able to do, we'll be able to learn how to do those things and grow in that knowledge and learn how to do those things. But what we are able to know and can do, we know it and can do it perfectly. And so there's going to be a lack there. Perfection does not imply in and of itself um, it doesn't imply that there's a lack, that there isn't any lack. Okay, that's what a lot of people understand. A lot of people understand perfection as um, the idea that you are without lack, that you are that you lack nothing. I can't remember how they put it, but it's just the idea that you have no lack, basically. But that is perfection in a way, but that's not really the idea. The idea is just more so that what you are able to, what you know and what you're able to do, you can do and know, and you know those things perfectly. That there is like this kind of perfection in what you already know and what you can already do. But there are things you don't know and you can't do that maybe you can learn how to do and know. So we won't have this our perfection won't be absolute. Okay, only God's perfection is absolute. Okay, it's not going to be an absolute perfection, but a kind of relative perfection or qualitative perfection of something like that. So again, he's just putting perfection in a box like you put free will in a box. There's so much nuance when it comes to perfection and concepts like that. So
because of the very concept of heaven, never mind hell. But let's move on to a related topic here, which is identity and memory, or consistency. I think that this is something really interesting to consider. We are told that in some sense, again, I don't care if you want to argue for a spiritual body, our physical body, or just a soul or spirit kind of floating up there, which I think that one is the most problematic one. So for this, let's imagine we're in some kind of a bodily form. We are told that we will be able to recognize other people. That's why people love the concept of heaven. When they lose a child and they've convinced themselves this child has gone to heaven, they now want to live their life in a way that makes sure they go to heaven so they can be reunited with that child. Well, what does that mean, right? What is that going to look like? Here's a question. Will you still have your memories from this time on earth in heaven? I doubt it, and here's why. Once again, that verse in Revelation provides us with so much ammunition. There are no tears, death, sorrow, or sin. How much sorrow do you have when you think about your life? You might have the best life ever. You might have every single thing that provides you with meaning and purpose and beauty in your life. And I bet when you think through your memories, you are filled with sorrow. And then again, whatever age you are as you're listening to this, imagine being at the end of your life, right? Whenever that life ends, you don't think you'll have ever had any regrets. You don't think you'll ever have anyone that you miss. What about the people who don't know God and they're in hell or oblivion or whatever? They're not with you. If you have a memory of them, if you have a concept of who you were and what you did on this earth and the people you hurt and the people that you hurt that can't be in heaven because they didn't think or were convinced of the right thing, how do you think that's going to go? You simply cannot be able to have these memories, this same conscious continuum. So what is your identity in heaven? How are you recognizing people? How are you holding on to your past? Because to hold on to your past at all, to be the same person, like this is a really fun kind of ship of Theseus kind of philosophical thought experiment here. To what degree are you still you if God has to rob you of some part of yourself, some part of your desire, some part of your will, some part of your nature, some part of your memory, some part of your previous existence, right? To really be able to ensure no tears, death, sorrow, or sin, you are being manipulated into some newer creation. And to what extent can you have that done until you are no longer yourself? I believe it would happen almost immediately. It would break down. You would almost immediately have to be considered something entirely new. And for God to work all these things out, I think he's going to have to rob you of entirely who you were.
A new story to share with your kids.
If you're a mother and a wife right now on earth, and your husband, like me, deconverts, and one of your children follows his example and never believes, and your other child does believe, when you die, somehow you have one child that believed correctly with you in heaven, but not your husband and not your other child. How is this going to go for you? Are you going to look at that one child in heaven, somehow recognizing them, somehow experiencing them, somehow appreciating them without being able to think about your other child and your husband? Can you separate that out? Does God have to rob you of those memories? One of the sickest answers I've heard is that when we are in heaven and we are so filled with the presence of God, we will delight even in our loved ones burning in hell, because the justice of God is so beautiful and we will understand it so clearly when we are in his power and glory. Not only is this a complete assertion that there is no backing for whatsoever, but it is one of the most grotesque ideas in the world, that God, who supposedly gives us family, instills in us the need to care, tend, and love to them, to develop with them, to communicate with them, to grow with them on this time in earth, would have us just fine, have that wife just fine with one of her children up in heaven, looking down like we see happens in the Bible, and being glad that her sweet little child, whose only sin was listening to its father and not being convinced of all of the dumb assertions that are supposed to be spiritual truths, burning and being tortured for eternity. If there is a God that would construct that kind of a setup, that's disgusting. If there is a God who would negate all that and just erase the memory, that is disgusting. You have been robbed of your identity. You have been robbed again of your free will. You are a slave. You are a worship slave. The Egyptians had slaves of the Israelites to work. Fine. It's nothing compared to wiping away your entire identity, forcing you to the floor, and spending eons and infinity doing nothing other than proclaiming the greatness of this God who did all those things. This is abhorrent. But I digress. Two last problems here. Let's talk.
Okay, so I want to mention something that I forgot to mention in the third problem when it comes to free will. And it's that aside from the idea that he's putting free will in the box and, and stuff like that, the other thing we have to understand is that if I want God to take away my free will to sin, then if he does it, why is that problematic? If I want him to do it, why is it problematic if he does it? It'd be different maybe if he did it apart from if I didn't want him to. I mean, if you don't want him to, then don't believe. But it's not like believers didn't know God was going to do this. Okay? They knew in the Bible he's going to take away, somehow make it so that they can't sin anymore. And I assume they wanted him to do that. So if you want God to take away your free will to do it, to sin, and just give you the free will to choose between different goods, why is it problematic if he does it? Why is he some kind of tyrant that's making you a slave? That's another thing. Okay, aside from the fact that a libertarian free will should not be defined as the ability to do evil, but rather just the ability to choose otherwise. Aside from that, if you want God to take away your free will to sin, then what's the problem if he does it? But moving on to the fifth problem with identity and memory, you can kind of make the same argument with that too. If you want God to change your identity, like who I am now, let's say I wanted God to give me a different identity. Would he be wrong if he did that? If I wanted him to do that? Some people might think, well, I want to be who I am. Look, your identity now in this life, it's a social construct. It's an illusion. Okay? You didn't choose your name. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose where you grew up at. You didn't choose where you lived. You didn't choose... there's so many things about your life that everything else around you chose. Okay? It's a social construct. Your identity is a social construct. It's an illusion. It's not even real. You didn't choose your identity. You didn't choose to be who you are. Okay? When God saves us, he doesn't give... what he does is he gives us the freedom to choose. He gives us the freedom to choose our own identity, to free ourselves from the illusion of who we are now that was given to us by external forces outside of us and society, and to choose freely to be who we want. Okay? And to free ourselves from, the identity that, and everyone else around us gave us. And we're free to choose to be who we want to be. In that sense, our identity changes. Now, if you want to remain who you are, a social construct, essentially, then fine. I don't know why you would, but okay. But if that's what you want, okay. The God's not going to take away your identity. He's not going to make it so that He's not going to give you the freedom to choose your own identity, and your own destiny, even to some extent. But I don't want that. I don't want to be who I am now. I want to be someone greater. I want to have the freedom to choose to be who I want to be. And if that means choosing a new family, a family that's divine, that's a part of the family of God, then I'm perfectly happy with that. Okay, let's just be honest, that is a better family. And I would hope that my brothers here and my family here would make the same decision, but if they didn't, well, that's on them. That's their choice. But I think this idea of identity is completely misunderstood. To argue that, no, he shouldn't take away our identity. He should let us be who we are right now. Well, who you are right now, let's just be honest, it's not very remarkable, okay? Like, we are not remarkable people, okay? It's not like our identity is all that great, okay? And God gives us the freedom to kind of decide who we want to be. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And then when it comes to memory, will we have memories of our past life? The answer is yes, but God can maintain our memories and still give us the freedom to choose to be someone else. If that's what we want. If we don't want that, then okay, He's not going to give it to us. But if we want that, then that's what He's going to do. When it comes to your memories, though, and your loved ones being in hell, I don't personally believe that the only people that went to hell in the Bible, okay, and I understand a lot of Christians might disagree with me on this. Most Christians believe every unbeliever goes to hell. I don't believe that. I made a video on that talking about hell. I don't believe every single unbeliever goes to hell. I think the only people that go to hell, I don't believe anybody goes to hell now, first of all. I think when people die, they just cease to exist. But the people that went to hell were the enemies of God. That's it. The enemies of God and His people, which were the fallen angels, and it was those who persecuted His people. Even in Revelation chapter 6, verse 9, when it says here, when He opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained, meaning they were persecuted. These were their enemies. And in verse 10, they said, they called out in a loud voice, how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Who are they asking for God to seek vengeance on? It was those who persecuted them. Hell was made for those who was made for the enemies of God. Not every unbeliever is an enemy of God and his people. Not every unbeliever persecuted God's people. It wasn't every unbeliever, okay? It was the Jews and it was some Gentiles. These were God's enemies. And because they hated God's people and persecuted them and fought against them, as an act of vengeance, God sent them to hell. Okay? So the demons go to hell, and the angels, the fallen angels, they spend an eternity in hell because they are immortal. These are immortal beings, and so they spend eternity in hell. Hell is eternal for them because they're immortal. Hell is not eternal for people because it's a sin against an infinite God. Okay? It's eternal for people who are immortal. Why? Because they're immortal. They can't die. But for people who go to hell who are mortal, like the Jews that persecuted God's people and the Gentiles who were mortals, they did go to hell, but it wasn't eternal for them. I believe they were annihilated out of existence at some point, and they were destroyed at some point. Why? Because they're mortal. So they didn't go to hell forever. And everyone else just ceased to exist. So hell is for God's enemies. Not every unbeliever is an enemy of God. I don't believe that. Okay? And I talk about that in previous videos, kind of. But in any case, I don't believe anybody goes to hell. But even if I concede that they do, one of the things that we're going to be like in heaven is, and I want to talk about the glorified body in the previous video, but we're going to possess a property, a quality known as impassibility. And impassibility is just the idea that we are without passions. Okay, so that's all. God is impassible, which means he's without passions. I mean, he doesn't have passions. He doesn't have emotions, right? And it's almost like the idea of stoicism. Like God is like stoic, kind of. We're going to be stoic too. We're going to be impassible. So we're not going to have our own inherent feelings and emotions that can harm us. Because feelings cause suffering, okay? The fact that you have feelings, that's... there's emotional suffering because you have emotions. If you were stoic and impassible, you wouldn't be able to suffer emotionally. And that's actually why God can't suffer emotionally. Because he's impassive. That doesn't mean he's like some kind of psychopath. It just means that there's a difference between being empathetic and being impassive. He can sense other people's emotions, but he doesn't have emotions of his own, which allows him to be free of suffering himself. And we'll be the same way. And so if people do go to hell, which our loved ones aren't going to be in hell, but even if they don't and they cease to exist, how will we be able to deal with them not being there with us? We'll be impassible. That's how. So we can keep those memories of our past life loved ones. Choose another identity. Choose to be someone we want. Choose a different identity than what we were here. And our loved ones not be there with us, and it not harm us because we will possess a quality known as impassibility. So that's the answer.
Talk about fairness in heaven, right? So I'm going to, again, major in the majors here, and let's just say that belief is what gets you there. Let's look at John's gospel, believe and be saved. I tell you these things so you can know and be assured, right? Believe and be saved. You made it.
So he's talking about fairness in heaven. And a reward system or whatever. So
you're there. You're in heaven. However, there are layers to heaven. There are different mansions. There are different levels of crowns that we can earn for ourselves based off our moral acts here on earth. And this, again, is we have to put aside that some people think it is our works that will get us to heaven. Let's just assume, however it happens, the people that make it to heaven make it to heaven. Think about the layers of unfairness that are going to exist in heaven. What is the point of a physical reward in heaven if you can't feel better about it than what someone else has?
When your kid is hurting and there's nothing you can do about it.
Like, think about this for a second. If there's no suffering in heaven, there's no sadness in heaven, then the person here who did not achieve this, they don't know what they're missing. They can't comprehend that. And the person who has this has no reason to enjoy it more than the person down here. Like, do you guys understand that? There's often the verses about the gnashing of teeth. There's one interpretation, a concept that this is actually for the believers in heaven on everything in heaven that they will lose out on because they didn't do what they were supposed to on earth. That's where the disappointment comes from, because there is this supposed class system in heaven, and you only get the 70 years or whatever it is on earth to develop what it's going to be, and then bam, now you're stuck. So what happens about the unreached people group that get reached? And there's an 80-year-old man in the tribe, and he hears about Jesus from some missionary, and he accepts it right there, and he does one good deed, and then bam, he dies. Now he's in heaven, no fault of his own. He's the lowest tier in heaven. And that's it for infinity, right? Like, that's insane. You can't progress once you're there. And if you can progress once you're there, which is sometimes the argument I've heard as I've tried to research this subject, how can you be better in heaven? Can you worship louder? Can you have a better voice? Can you be more moral? How can one be more moral than another one if there's nothing immoral to ever do as a comparison guide? This doesn't make sense. You guys, heaven does not make sense. But let's move on to our final point here. And this is...
Okay, his final point is a little... he just says that, well, heaven's not real. Okay, that's not an argument. So, but... he kind of talks about just Christians who forego enjoyment in this life for heaven for something that isn't real, and I don't think Christians should do that. But I won't get into that last problem there. This video is getting pretty long, so I'll end it here. But I want to hit on the final problem, which is the sixth problem here, which is fairness in heaven, and it's just. He just talks about there's this reward system where, like, people in heaven, when you get to heaven, Christ is going to reward you, and maybe you're going to have this many rewards, and this person's going to have this many rewards, and like, if there's no suffering, we're not going to know, like, what we're missing. There's not going to be any kind of... And the person up here is not going to know how good he has it, and the person down here is not going to know how bad. Like, it's basically this idea that there's going to be this kind of inequality in a way, right? Where we're not going to be able to be satisfied with the positions we have in heaven if there's like this static reward system, right? Which I think he's right. If it was true that the reward system was static, I think that in heaven either we will be equal in our status and rewards, or we will be able to, that in heaven, it's not the idea that we're just going to be rewarded and that's going to be our position for eternity. No, we will be able, there's going to be a constant reward. We're going to be constantly rewarded, okay, throughout infinity, because God's going to reward us for the things we do and accomplish for an eternity. So the reward is going to be constant, and we'll be able to transcend one another and things like that, and it's going to be this constant thing. Okay, God's not going to reward us once and that's it. Okay, it's gonna be something throughout all of eternity that we're going to be experiencing the rewards and blessings that God has for us forever. It's not going to be this one-time thing that we just experience and go through. That's not what heaven's going to be like. It's either going to be, there's either going to be an equality between people and reward, or there's going to be an ability to transcend and pass one another in status, in divine status and reward, because it's going to be a constant thing that we will be undergoing and experiencing, because God is going to give us the opportunity to achieve greater and greater heights of enlightenment, wisdom, knowledge, reward, and glory, and things like that. So yeah. And the idea of morality, you know, heaven's not going to be about morality, okay? There will be we will have morals, but that's not going to be the point of heaven, okay? It's not going to be who loves the best and who does that the best or something like that. Like, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the point of heaven. But anyway, I'll end it here. So tell me what you guys think about this video. Comment below. Leave a like. Subscribe, please. Share. Hit the notification bell. If you like this video, if you like me doing reaction videos and commentary videos like this, I know this video was a bit long. If you guys think I should do it shorter, let me know. But yeah, so I had kind of fun doing it, so yeah, let me know what you guys think. But so yeah, I'll see you in the next video. So have a good day.